Welcome to the Dr. John Roland Show. As you know, we take an integrated look at a variety of problems, and I have invited today and have the pleasure to introduce the Arthritis Foundation of North Texas. And I have the privilege of being joined by Al James, the Executive Director, and Angela Bynum. Angela is the Communication Integrated Director. Can you say that?
Community Engagement Director.
Community Engagement Director. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Arthritis is such a trouble for so many people, and reviewing the information about your organization, this kind of problem is getting worse. There is an epidemic of arthritis related to so many things. You help so many things. So I'd like to introduce the clients to what it is that you do. So Al, can you tell me a little bit about your foundation?
Sure. Well, to your point, arthritis is the leading cause of disability in our country, affecting 1 in 4. So that's about 54 million Americans that are affected with arthritis, and 300,000 of which are children. I think a lot of people don't realize that children can be diagnosed with arthritis. Yes. It's not just aches and pains as you get older. It's so much more than that. And it is a big problem. The term arthritis itself is kind of an umbrella term that encompasses over 100 different conditions affecting the tissue and the joints around, the joints and the tissues around the joints. Mm-hmm. So everything from rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, psoriatic arthritis, down to fibromyalgia, gout, and lupus. So there's quite a few conditions that encompass the term arthritis.
Absolutely, and this is one of the reasons why I'm so interested. I haven't shared with you, but I lecture about autoimmune disease and about the origin, the pathophysiology of autoimmune disease. And the miracle is that we're starting to sort that out. We're starting to make sense of what really happens, what causes it, because you aren't born with arthritis, right? I mean, and you're a sufferer, both of you are sufferers from it. Something happens along the way, and maybe we'll get into that. Angela, tell me about your association with the organization, and I hear that you've been associated in different ways for a long time.
I actually am an employee for the Arthritis Foundation. Mm-hmm. I have been with them a little bit over a year. It is my second term with the Arthritis Foundation. I actually worked there as my first job out of college. I moved back to Dallas to be near my family, and I actually have rheumatoid arthritis, and my doctor at the time was on the board of the foundation. Mm-hmm. And said, I'll be happy to write you a letter of recommendation if you'd like to apply for a job there. So I applied for the job with his recommendation and got in, I'm sure because he was my doctor, and worked there for about 6 years and just really learned the ins and outs of the nonprofit world. It was a great teacher.
Fascinating. Well, and there's been so much progress with this disease during that period of time. So I would imagine that you've learned a lot about arthritis and its many presentations and conditions. And,
yeah,
and you've grown with the foundation.
And so many different treatments over the years, mm-hmm. from the time that I was diagnosed to now. It's remarkable the amount of medications that have come on the market, mm-hmm. That are really, really working for people. And you know, the Arthritis Foundation has really increased their efforts on sharing resources and tools for all patients, regardless mm-hmm. of what their diagnosis is, that are available to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that are very, very helpful. So I think the foundation has done a really great job really trying to envelop the people that are living with this disease.
And I think that's one of the things that y'all do so well. Now, you were diagnosed as a child, right?
I was.
And we were talking about that. Being diagnosed as a child can be very isolating. Tell me about your experience, and then tell me also what it is that y'all do for families with juvenile arthritis, kids with arthritis, which, yeah, can be very isolating.
Sure. I was diagnosed when I was 15. I was a sophomore in high school, and I just started feeling really bad. And I don't know if this is common among other people with rheumatoid arthritis, but my left hand swelled and became very red and felt feverish. And so one day my mom came to the high school and she said, "I'm taking you to the hospital." And I kicked and screamed and yelled and said, "No, you're not. No, you're not." And she did anyway, because she was the parent. And I spent 7 days in the hospital.
Wow.
And basically, by a process of elimination, they discovered that I had juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and immediately started trying to treat that, and then recommend me to go to a juvenile doctor, because with a juvenile disease, you don't see an adult rheumatologist. You see a juvenile pediatric rheumatologist.
Now, you mentioned not feeling well. Can you amplify on that?
Well, it started with feeling feverish, very tired, with the swelling of the hand. As it progressed, and it did very quickly, I had a rash that was all over my body. I had a fever all day, every day, that never went away.
How high?
You know, I'm sure it varied. That time period is very, very blurry to me. It was traumatic, to say the least. I was pulled from school. I spent a year being taught at home by an instructor through the school district that I was in at the time. And it was a very, very bad time period. And you talk about how isolating it is. And when you're a teenager, other kids don't understand that. And I lost friends that thought that I wasn't fun anymore.
Because you were sick.
And as a kid,
and frustrating because people couldn't find the cause, right?
Sure, sure.
Yes.
And really, to this day, 35 years later, we don't know what the cause is. We have our own feelings about that, but I believe most diagnoses for this disease are unknown.
Yeah.
I think families probably each have their own ideas, but there really is no rhyme or reason to why it happens.
So I can help you elaborate on that. It certainly sounds like that it may have been a virus that caused that initial inflammation to occur. It stimulates the immune system, and you know that one of the manifestations is an antibody that attacks other antibodies, and then in the process also attacks synovial linings, the lining of the joints all over your body. But as you quickly recognized, you had these other things too, like fatigue, which is terrible because, again, you do the test, well, all these tests are normal, and I've had lots of patients have that experience. Well, you know, what's wrong? Is it all in my head? I'm sure that went through your mind as well.
I don't feel like that was the case at all, just because there were so many physical symptoms related to it.
Yes.
And so many visible symptoms.
Yeah.
My body swelled up pretty quickly, all over.
Wow.
And I got to the point where I could not walk. I was anemic to the point of when I would stand up, I would almost pass out.
Wow.
And so symptom was so bad that we knew something was wrong. We just didn't know what it was. But again, the in my situation, and I think in a lot of people's situations, it progresses very quickly. And our advice from the Arthritis Foundation is try to get into a doctor as quickly as possible so that you can slow that process down and get on some disease-modifying medications so that you can either stop that process or slow it down so that you don't have the joint damage that you can have if you don't see a doctor soon enough.
And you're suggesting a rheumatologist, a specialist that is particularly skilled at recognizing inflammation.
Yes.
A couple of things I'll mention. We've got a couple of families that are involved with us whose child at the age of as young as 2 or 3 were experiencing the similar things that Angela described.
Yes.
And as you can imagine, misdiagnosed several times before they finally, got to what the root of the cause was. In some cases, we have kids as young as 2 or 3 that had unnecessary surgeries because they were misdiagnosed.
Wow.
So, it is a problem. And then also, to the point of rheumatologists, there's a shortage of rheumatologists in the country. And this is something the Arthritis Foundation recognizes, and we have launched a new initiative to fund rheumatology fellowships around the country to try to draw more people into the field so that we can address this issue of the aging out rheumatologist and those that will be retiring. And to Angela's point, there are some states that don't even have a pediatric rheumatologist. So some families are having to drive, many hours across state lines, often being on a wait list 6 months to a year to, get in to see a doctor. And as Angela mentioned, the disease can progress quickly in that time frame. So getting in to see a doctor and getting on the right treatment early is paramount.
Fascinating. And I can tell you, being a doctor treating patients with similar conditions, if they don't have obvious physical conditions, something like fibromyalgia, where they just have continuing smoldering, milder forms of disease, the patients can get really frustrated in trying to find a diagnosis. And the lab tests, quote, are normal. Well, lab tests don't tell you everything. And the fact is, just doing a quality symptom questionnaire can tell you that there's real problems with inflammation going on, even though the tests are normal. So that's probably a good thing for patients to recognize.
Sure.
So we're kind of highlighting juvenile arthritis. And you mentioned being isolated, not being able to be so active at such a young age, and actually kind of withdrawing from school for about a year. Y'all provide some support for your families.
We do. We recognize that, clearly research to find a cure is important, but there's other things that we do, and one of those things is making community connections for families. Oftentimes, these families get diagnosed and they feel so alone, like, oh my gosh, one, they didn't know arthritis was possible in a child. And then 2, when they're diagnosed, they just assume, well, we know no one else. And so bringing those families together so that they can not feel so isolated and alone, share stories, share experiences. So we have something coming up on October 13th, our JA Family Day. And this one will be in Fort Worth. We had one earlier this year in Dallas. We try to do 2 a year, one on each side of the Metroplex. And this one's going to be at Pinstripes. We have a dietitian coming out to give some...
So Pinstripe is a bowling lane?
It's a bowling alley.
Okay.
So we will have a fun activity for the kids, as well as they'll just get to meet, other kids that have arthritis as well. And while they're having fun and bowling, the parents are going to be learning about how diet and nutrition can affect managing their disease.
Juvenile Arthritis Youth Day. That's what the JA stands for. Yes. So you mentioned how diet can affect. Tell me more about that.
Well, we have a slogan called the Champion of Yes. We're all about empowering the patients to say what they can do versus what they can't do. Because a lot of times once you're diagnosed with something, it's all about, well, you can't do this anymore, you can't do that anymore.
Yes.
We want to turn that around and turn it into a positive. And so one of those ways to help them manage their disease, where it's, help people find exercise that they can do with their limitations. But I think it's very important to stay active. Getting enough sleep. And then also diet and nutrition, how what you put in your body affects how your body feels and reacts. And that's really what this dietitian's going to delve into. And I think a lot of it, some of it is trial and error. I mean, just all the patients I've met, some people have certain, food triggers that they know to stay away from, whereas maybe the patient sitting next to them at that same meeting, their food triggers are different. So I do think it's very personalized, but I think there's some overall general health guidelines that are good for anyone, whether you have arthritis or not, but clearly it can affect how your disease makes you feel.
So I can tell you that there is, a anti-inflammatory diet, which has been proven to help with arthritis, and so it's an emphasis on green leafy vegetables and that kind of thing. There certainly is a strong connection with some people eating grains being bad for arthritis. There is a relationship between gluten, and we've all heard people having troubles with gluten. But there are some real problems with gluten. Probably not everybody, but many, maybe as many as 40 to 50% shouldn't be eating gluten.
Wow.
So yeah, there are some ties in there. You've had some experiences about things that make you worse and make you better, that are different than your other friends that have other diseases. Tell me about that.
I think, I've found that, living in Texas is one of the hottest places on earth. And summer is very difficult for me, just because of the extremely high temperatures, sometimes very high humidities. And it just...
I would think that would be helpful.
People are always saying the reason that people retire in places like Arizona is because it's dry.
Yes.
It may be very high heat, but it's dry heat, which is supposedly good for you. I think that I would be better in that situation than what we have here in Texas. I feel like we do definitely have a lot more humidity than Arizona because it's the desert, but it's a little overwhelming to me, and I just get really tired very quickly. Whereas cold, which most people say they don't like, and that it makes them, creaky and it's the exact opposite for me. I feel revitalized and I sleep better. So, is that just me? Sure. And I'm sure in that situation, everybody's going to be different. Like Al says, somebody's trigger is another person's, best case scenario. So every person will be different.
We often talk about barometric pressure having effect, and as a doctor, I've learned a lot. I cannot find anything to explain that relationship. But some people know that the weather's changing, that the bad weather's coming, and their joints flare and everything. Does that happen to you?
I know when it's about to rain. I don't know why. I mean, most of us can tell if it's about to rain. But I have heard people say, "Oh, I get a little creaky and a little sore right before it rains," especially people that probably have more osteoarthritis than rheumatoid. I think just because you get a little achy and right before a big rain, because they say because of the barometric pressure.
Fascinating. And you've also noticed that stress affects your arthritis.
Yes, most definitely. I think anybody with an autoimmune disease or is dealing with any kind of disease on a daily basis that's chronic, anything that is putting a lot of pressure on you, or if many things are happening at once, I definitely think it has caused flares in the past for me.
So another phase is that medicine is now catching up with that. We haven't really known exactly why, but stress does affect the flow of steroids, and when you get stressed, it flows away from the sex hormones and shunts it towards cortisone, which is a treatment for many arthritis. So your body is trying to match the inflammation of the stress because of the stress. And stress also affects the adrenal gland. And it's very important. We're now recognizing several milder phases of adrenal insufficiency. You're not producing enough cortisone to match the inflammation that's going on. So things like sleep, and you mentioned sleep, didn't you?
Sleep is very, very important to me. I sleep a lot.
And it's important to recognize that the disease activity really mandates more sleep.
Well, I think resting is really good for us, as well as activity. You know, they tell people with arthritis, get out there, be active, don't sit still, get your exercise, try to remain active, you know, even when you hurt a little bit. Because I think it's so important to just keep moving, because once you sit still and you stop moving, it's not good for anybody, whether you have arthritis or not.
And we've got tools on our website that can assist with that. We've got a tool called Track and React, where you kind of track, you know, your daily activities and then react, you know, how you felt and what your symptoms were, down to an exercise app, Your Exercise Solution. It'll ask you a series of questions about, you know, what types of exercise you like, what limitations have you noticed, and it's really going to tell you what exercise will work for you. So like Angela said, we want to keep you moving, and if your arthritis has sort of made you, you know, want to become a little bit more of a couch potato, we've got some tools and resources on our website that'll help keep you moving. May not be exactly what you're used to for exercise, but the important thing is that you do keep moving.
Absolutely, and these are wonderful things to tell our audience, because we tend to get locked into just thinking about the medications for treatment of this, but I can tell you as an integrated physician that these other things are as important, and they are weaved into the fabric of life, and to recognize that they have impact on your disease. We're starting to make the connections. We're starting to understand that. It's, you know, old doctors used to do it just because that's what their intuition taught them. Now we're kind of understanding that. So I love the fact that you're interacting and teaching and helping patients.
And if someone's not real internet savvy, we do have an 800 number that's manned 24/7 with clinical
social workers
that can answer questions. And I never memorize that number off the top of my head, so I'm going to cheat. It's 844-571-HELP or 844-571-4357.
So tell me more about that. Social workers actually answer the phone, and what do they do? What do they say?
You can call if you're having problems with your insurance covering, you know, your medication. You can call, they don't specifically give medical advice, obviously, but they can help you find a rheumatologist in your area. There's a whole myriad of things that they can assist you with, except for, you know, medical advice. But it's especially helpful for somebody. A lot of those answers are already on our website, and there's a lot of tools and resources on the website. But, you know, some people, that may not be their method of
I know some people are more challenged than others dealing with the internet. So it's wonderful that you have a live phone. Somebody actually answers the phones. That's incredible. We're drawing to a close, but you also host 2 events a year for whole families to get together and learn more about these conditions.
I think you might be speaking about our JA conferences. We do 2 JA conferences nationally. They move around each year where they're located. They're usually in the summer, so that it's easier for families to attend while the kids are out of school. But people go to those conferences. We have about 800 or 900 people that attend each conference each summer, and overwhelmingly people come away from those conferences saying it was life-changing. Not only just the educational value that they got from hearing different doctors and experts speak, but really just connecting with other families and knowing that they're not alone on that journey.
That's great. And you have stress reduction, you have nutritionists, you have life counselors, I would guess, all kinds of activities for all ages. Is that right?
Absolutely.
So this is truly a family conference.
It is. We also do a family camp here in Texas. It's called KGAT, which stands for Kids Get Arthritis Too. It is a week-long camp coming up next weekend, actually. And the parents and the siblings get to attend because the disease doesn't just affect the child, it affects the entire family.
Yes.
We also do a week-long residential camp here in Texas, where we have over 60 kids that attend a week-long residential camp. And again, we hear families say that their reserved, child that's feeling different and isolated and alone comes back from camp and they're a different child.
Yes.
They've come out of their shell. Their self-confidence has gone through the roof. So really trying to give kids that normal summer camp experience.
They're not alone.
Feel different.
They're not alone with this condition.
And not feel
life
different
can
or
go
not
on.
feel broken.
Yeah.
And
Fantastic.
create beautiful friendships that they can maintain through the years. Somebody that they can talk to and feel free to talk about their disease. And that's one of the whole points of camp, is just so that they can learn to be more independent, so that they can learn to be more bold, you know, and just really create that sense of I'm going to be okay, and I can do this.
And the fun thing is to watch several of these kids that go through our camp system then end up becoming counselors.
Oh, yes.
They want to give back once they've gone
Absolutely.
through our camp system. So it's a fun thing to watch.
Fascinating. Well, I've loved having you here on this show. We've got to do this again. There's so many other things that we need to talk about. So we're going to draw a close. I really appreciate the Arthritis Foundation for joining me on the Dr. John Roland Show. Al Jones, thank you. James, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Al James and Angela Bynum, I really appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Such color, and
Thanks for having us.
thank you for educating us about arthritis.
Thank you.
Thank you.